Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Good evening. Today is Black Monday, the day the Dow dropped more than 500 points.
Please join me in welcoming George Soros.
It's panic. Everyone's everybody would try to find a bottom.
To stand up and do something, become really engaged in the electoral process in this country.
What we have to confront is a deep, systemic and structural restructuring of our world. And this will take some time. And the world will look differently after we have gone through this transition process.
For centuries, they've been stuffing their stomachs with human flesh, and they've been stuffing their pockets with money. But they must realize that this bowl of vampires is about to end.
We have an army of digital soldiers.
That this is coming. This is going to be a part of a future where we can take back our power in ways we didn't even think about in the industrial age that are coming in the digital age.
But the common people of these countries in their heart, they can feel what's happening. They can see our struggle for our independence, for our true sovereignty. And they see this connection with their aspirations to be truly independent, which is exacerbated by the fact that in the Western elites there is a strong desire to freeze the current unfair state of things in international affairs.
Well, let me tell you something, brother. When they took a shot at my hero, and they tried to kill the next President of the United States, enough was enough. And I said, let Trumpomania run wild, brother. Let Trumpomania rule again. Let Trumpomania make America great again.
People who don't believe are walking dead. They are asleep. And this is the awakening.
There are many people in the world who really don't understand. Freedom has many difficulties, but we have never had to put a wall up to keep our people in. Freedom is indivisible. And when one man is enslaved, all are not free.
Modern war has become a struggle for men's minds as well as for their bodies. Today we face an enemy who spends enormous sums of money and manpower all over the globe in an attempt to subvert the thinking of the people of the free world, to confuse, divide, and ultimately to subjugate.
It is a contest unlike any we have ever faced in our history as a nation.
Contest for the minds and hearts of people around the world, all people.
When power corrupts, poetry cleanses. We must never forget that art is not a form of propaganda. It is a form of truth.
Psychologists find that control of emotions can be gained by understanding the stimulus response pattern. Many everyday things become associated with these primary stimuli, partly by a process called conditioning.
It's a strange, shadowy world. The doctored photograph, the misquotation, the insinuation, and the lie.
I think of fire in connection with emotion. Cars, defense.
You've got to get a hold of yourself.
We have to work together. You have to help.
We'll light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world.
Yes, in modern warfare, our military leaders are finding that words and ideas are highly effective weapons.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Book of Trump. I'm your host, Gordon McCormick, aka the Ghost of Base Patrick Henry. And tonight's chapter is chapter 33, Warfighting. This is going to be a really great and exciting episode. My guest and I have already decided that this is probably going to be a multi-part episode just because the material is so rich. Before I bring him on, let's hear a message from a sponsor.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our biggest 3-in-1 sale ever with a limited edition product, a back in stock special, and a closeout deal you won't find anywhere else. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get our MyPillow bed sheets only $29.88. Any color, any style, any size, even kings, regular $119.98, only $29.88. Once they're gone for good. How about our My Towels? They're finally back in stock, but not for long. Get a 6-piece My Towel set, regular $69.98, now only $39.98. And for the first time and the only time ever, get our limited edition premium My Pillows. They're made with Giza cotton and designer gusset. Queen $17.98, Kings only $19.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get the best offers ever. Quantities are extremely limited, so order now.
All right. And so, yes, again, chapter 33, Warfighting, and my guest tonight is Lt Colonel Oak McCulloch. Oak, how are you? Welcome back to the program.
Yeah, well, I'm doing well, Gordon, and thanks for having me back on the program.
Of course, of course. For those who don't recall or maybe missed it, Oak came on before for the chapter entitled Maneuver Warfare. And through the course of that conversation, he mentioned in passing, he referenced a book, a field manual published by the Marine Corps called FM1 Warfighting. And then when we were in GART at Deadwood recently, he actually gave me his copy of the book. And I have read this thing, probably 5 times already. It's a very easy read. It's a very compelling read. I actually saw somebody in the chat. Is it Marine? Who is it? Marine in the Woods. Marine in the Woods says that he used to teach this manual. So now the pressure's really on. Now I have 2 guys here, at least. I have Oak and I have Marine in the Woods in the chat who used to teach this. So now I'm probably gonna make a fool out of myself talking about it. But what a great book, and I really appreciate all the notes and the highlights that you put in here, Oak.
Yeah, well, like I was telling you before the show started, that was my Bible as a lieutenant, because that came out, the Marine Corps, they came out with that manual before we came out with FM 100. And they were both basically the same thing, maneuver warfare, and how to implement maneuver warfare. Just the FM 100, Army version, which is operations, which is now FM3, but they renamed all of them just to confuse people, I'm sure. But the FM100 was much thicker and much more in detail because the Army bigger and does things that the Marine Corps didn't do. But that was our Bible as a lieutenant. My 1st battalion commander issued out a copy of that to every officer in the battalion.
Yeah, and it really is mind blowing. Like when I was reading this, I think it was on the flight home from Deadwood. I was taking pictures of the highlights that you would put in here, and I was sending it like in our private like Badlands chat to all the other hosts and saying, "Look at what is written in here about kinetic." I mean, technically, this is supposed to be about kinetic warfare, but the applications of it. It's kind of mind blowing how applicable all of this stuff is to probably every style of warfare, I'd imagine, but particularly the information warfare.
Yeah, well, I think you can use maneuver warfare in the dime. Diplomacy, information, military, economic, because it's that type of warfare. It doesn't have to be kinetic. In fact, the whole purpose of maneuver warfare isn't to kill and destroy people. It's to demoralize them so that they give up, and that you have to expend less energy to win that battle. So that can apply to the information war just as much as it can to the actual war fighting.
Yeah, just to make that point, I've gone through and hopefully y'all can see this, but it's a relatively short manual. I mean, it's 4 chapters, and then each chapter is broken up into subsections. But I went ahead and grabbed the highlights that Oak had put in his copy. There's this first section, friction, which talks about the friction of conflict. But I wanted to go to this second section called uncertainty. And I just want to read these highlights that Oak had put in his copy. And y'all tell me, or just in the chat, discuss amongst yourselves the application of this to what we're going through right now collectively. Just the highlights. While we try to reduce these unknowns, it's referring to the fog of war, by gathering information, we must realize we cannot eliminate them. We must learn to fight in an environment of uncertainty, which we can do by developing simple, flexible plans, planning for contingencies, developing standing operating procedures, and fostering initiative among subordinates. We should clearly understand that the acceptance of risk does not equate to the imprudent willingness to gamble the entire likelihood of success on a single improbable event. We must view chance not only as a threat, but also as an opportunity, which we must be ever ready to exploit. Powerful stuff. And, hopefully people are getting what I'm hinting at here. Not only what I think our responsibilities are as participants in this American experiment, democracy, but also the information battle space, but also, the way that somebody like Donald Trump, who I think is kind of the man in the arena, so to speak, the champion in the arena, what he has to be thinking about as he's navigating this minefield and trying to move all of us together across the river, so to speak, to the other side.
Yeah, I think that, I haven't seen those in years, those highlights that I did, but brings back a lot of memories because those were the kinds of things that we talked about as when I was a lieutenant in our officer development program that we would have. We'd go through this manual and we talk about how that applies to what we have to do, and the friction of war. We talked about surfaces and gaps, the surfaces were the hard things that you didn't want to run into because that's where you're going to have to spend a lot of time, energy, money, resources, people to penetrate that. The gaps were where you tried to go. And again, that's just as applicable to the information warfare as it is to kinetic warfare. There are soft spots out there that we can get into that we don't have to expend as much energy to make that penetration that we would have to on a surface. And the risk and gamble, field I always go back to Field Marshal Rommel. He defined it this way. He said, a risk is something that you take, and if you fail, you can recover from it. A gamble is something, if you take it and you fail, there's no coming back from that. And, so you got to really make a conscious decision. I'm not saying that you don't ever gamble if you have to, but it has to be a conscious decision to gamble because the stakes are very, very high. Whereas in risk, the stakes might be high, but they're not catastrophic if you fail.
Yeah, and that kind of points to what it's saying right here is that we should clearly understand that the acceptance of risk does not equate to the imprudent willingness to gamble the entire likelihood of success on a single improbable event. And that I just keep thinking about people thinking about or these ideas, these theories that everything is just going to be disclosed as far as this information psychological warfare campaign in one foul swoop, and we're all just going to suddenly have this aha moment, meaning the entire public is going to have this aha moment, and suddenly everyone's going to understand with clarity all the lies and deceptions that we have suffered, and we're all going to come together and sing Kumbaya, and we're just going to move together in the same direction and never argue again, and everyone's just going to live in like a state of utopia. That's a single improbable event that's never going to happen. Yeah, and so
never going to
happen. Gambling the success of the entire thing on that by coming out and just trying to have like a press conference where you just disclose everything seems really foolish when you look at it through the lens of this manual.
Well, and the other part that I really like in that is that the way you win in combat, whatever type of combat it is in warfare, whether it's armed conflict or information or diplomacy or economic, is that you have multiple plans. Because I was stationed out at the National Training Center for 2 years as an observer controller. So every month, a brand new unit would rotate into what we called the box out into the desert. And we'd put them through scenarios, warfighting scenarios. And after every one of them, then we give them an after action review, telling them, okay, what were you supposed to do? What did you do? What went wrong? And how can you get better at it? And so one of the things I said almost every mission, because it was true, was, you can come up with the best plan in the world, but the enemy still has a say. So you better have a plan B and a plan C, because they don't want to die any more than you do. So they're not going to come right where you want them to come. That we wouldn't. So why would they? So, but that was something that it took a few missions to get it into their mind that just because you build the perfect defense doesn't mean they're coming.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's like this next very short section, like that word right there, fluidity. The idea that there's a plan. I mean, I don't think it's that far-fetched to think that President Trump came into office with a plan of what he wants to accomplish.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but fluidity. It's like you have to be able to adapt. And the one highlight that you have from here that I think really stands out is success depends in large part on the ability to adapt to a constantly changing situation.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to, and I think we kind of hit it in the first show that I was on when we were talking about maneuver warfare, in that the mission, mission-oriented orders, where the commander has his commander's intent. At the end of this is what I want it to look like. I don't care how you get me there, because we got a plan. But that old saying that the plan goes out the window after the first shot is fired is absolutely true. So if you got a simple plan that you can pivot off of, with different plans off of that, then if this happens, then we're going to this plan. If that happens, we're going to this plan. And then you just got to be flexible enough that if something happens and you haven't planned for it, then you got to be able to adapt to it. And the mission, the commander's intent and the mission-oriented orders allows people on the ground who have eyes on the situation to make decisions without asking for permission to do it. And that speeds up the decision-making cycle so that you can then get inside of their decision-making cycle, and you're doing things to them and they're trying to decide three things back you did what they were going to do, and they're already back behind the power curve. And that's what allows you to win their mind, to demoralize them. Once they realize that they can't catch up, then they usually surrender.
Yeah, and that was what really stuck with me, I think, from our conversation, because I think if I remember correctly, that episode was the week leading into the Massachusetts GART, the Plymouth GART, and then I think it was Cam and I were up on stage talking about moving forward and what are we supposed to do, like we being civilians trying to navigate this complex situation. And I mean, that's what stuck out to me, is the idea of, okay, we all know what the plan is here. The plan is to save the country. We know what the things are that we need to address in order to get there. There's certain institutions that need to be investigated. There's certain people who need to be investigated. There's certain events that need to occur. We need to hit certain milestones, like addressing election integrity. That's, John Harold's, the hill that he's going to die on. But everyone has the hill they're going to die on. And I think it's important that we all kind of pick that column, pick that vertical, and then focus on it and understand, break it down further into, all right, what are the objectives that get us there? What are the obstacles? How do we develop a plan to actually accomplish this, as opposed to just spinning our wheels, speculating about what may or may not happen, right?
Right. Yeah. And like, I believe there's a plan, but the trust the plan, the people who say just trust the plan, we still have to do our part. And I think you hit a good point there, is not everybody is concerned about every little thing, and that's okay. Pick your lane that you want to be involved in, and understand you're not in it alone. There's plenty of other people out there that will help you, and connect with them and build, come up with plans at the local level, and that will build on itself. But I think you've got to, you really do have to focus on focus in on what's important to you, because you can't do it all. There's no way that you can be concerned about. You can be concerned, but there's not you can't dedicate time, effort, treasure, whatever, to all the different causes. So pick the ones that mean something to you, and that will help. And I think, again, it's that commander's intent, President Trump's intent of what it needs to look like at the end. And then we just need to figure out how to get there. And I don't think he cares how we get there. He realizes he doesn't have complete control, that he can dictate exactly how some of these things are going to happen. And that's okay. And when I talk about decision making, not being a micromanager, using the creativity of other people, I always use the analogy of 9. I said, if I tell you we got to get to the number 9, that's my intent. Get to the number 9. Why do I care how you get there? 7 plus 2 is 9. 6 plus 3 is 9. 4 plus 5 is 9. 8 plus 1 is 9. I don't care how you get to 9. You just got to get us to 9. And I think that's something that President Trump does very well, is that he delegates things and he allows people to make decisions that are on the ground, seeing things that he may not be able to see, or if he does see it, it's too late. He's already way behind the decision-making power curve, that then it becomes mute, overcome by events.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And one of the things that we talked about pretty early on, I think is probably a good opportunity to jump into it. As we were discussing doing this episode, you had mentioned your experience in Kosovo, I believe. I hosted. I probably spent 5 hours or 6 hours streaming today, hosting the different Netanyahu Trump meetings at the White House. And of course, there was a big press conference at the end where Trump announced his plan for peace in the Middle East, and we'll see what happens next. But obviously, I think most people can appreciate the tribalism of the Middle East and the ancient nature of that conflict. But it sounds like when you were in Kosovo, you had a similar type of dynamic that you were dealing with tribes that historically didn't get along, and you had to figure out how to navigate the diplomacy. And it wasn't really a kinetic situation as much of a diplomatic situation. If you could speak to that, please.
Yeah, it was diplomatic and informational and economics. I used economics as well. So I think, one of the things that, because we in America, we think we know what hatred is. We have no idea what hatred is. And that's a good thing. When you start talking about the hatred of the Arab world, some of the Arab world, some people in the Arab world and the Israeli world, or in Kosovo, it was the Serbs, the Albanians, and the Gypsies. And, Northern Ireland, it was the Catholics and the Protestants. There's all kinds of different examples out there, and they're all a little bit different. But to change to change that hatred usually takes about 50 years, about 2 generations, because you're not going to change the adults. That's very few of those are ever going to change. You're probably not going to change the kids of those adults because they've already taught a lot of that to them. You may change a few more of them, but you're really looking at those kids is who you're looking at. And it usually takes about 50 years. And Northern Ireland is a very good example of that. I mean, that's about what it took. And it's not perfect at this point, but at least it's better than it was. But one of the things I quickly figured out is that you got to start with what they had in common. And I think that's, again, I think that's part of what President Trump does, is he starts with what's in common. Because if you start with what's different, you're never going to get to the middle. So you start with what's in common. What does everybody want? They want their kids to grow up and not have to fight in wars. They want put a roof over their family's head. They want their kids to eat. They want their kids to go to school and be better off than they were. Those are the things that we all have in common. And then we can work out from there. So that was where I started. But we did information warfare. I had a PSYOPs team, that a psychological operation team that before we'd go into a village to do like a medcap, a medical, give people shots and medicine for colds and whatever it was that they did, wounds, clean up wounds or whatever. We'd send them in there the week before and kind of set the stage that we were coming in to help and that we wanted to help and, just to set the stage a little bit. So we used information war. We definitely use diplomacy with, let's start with what we have in common. And then I used to use economic power as well. I'd say, I went to a gas station that was owned by an Albanian and he refused to sell to the Serbs. And so I said, that's not an option here. You will sell to the Serbs. And he said, okay, well, the first time Serbs came in, he charged them twice as much for the gas as he did the Albanians. And I said, no, that's not acceptable. You're going to sell it for the same price. And he refused. So I went back, we got some padlocks, came back over there and we locked all the pumps. And I said, and I put a guard on the pumps. And I said, when you decide you want to sell to the Serbs, we'll unlock your pumps. Until then, you're out of business. It only took him about a week to figure out that maybe he needed to sell to the Serbs. But they knew we weren't going to shoot him. I mean, that was I told my guys, I said, if we fire a shot, we fail because that's not what we're here for. Yeah. But we, so we had to figure out other ways to influence them. And we used the entire dime, diplomatic, information, even military, although we never used the military part of it. We certainly flexed our muscle and let them know what we were capable of. I set up several ranges and invited all the local leaders to come and see what the M1 tank and the Bradley could do and the artillery. And so they knew that what we were capable of, but we had no intentions of using it unless it was absolutely in self-defense. But we used all the other We used all of it in Kosovo the whole time.
Yeah, because really what you're describing is incentives. Like you're describing incentives, and it sounds like what was driving his incentive structure initially was his cultural, historic contempt for these people and his loyalty to that ideology. And then suddenly you introduced economic incentive that was much more pressing to him and much more immediate than whatever this ideological incentive was, and suddenly he responded to it. And so that had a direct real world result.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did that with several different things. We did it with a quarry. We did it with the meat packing plant. Yeah. So, we one of the jobs as a leader is to solve problems. And you see the problem and you come up with a way to solve it. And one of the most favorite things I've ever got a chance to do was I got a chance to hear General Hal Moore speak. I actually got to hear him twice, but General Hal Moore, for those in the audience that don't know who he was that character in We Were Soldiers Once and Young that Mel Gibson played. So he fought the first American battle in the Vietnam War, where it was only Americans fighting. It wasn't even the Viet Cong; it was the NVA, the North Vietnamese Army. And he said, he got up on stage one time and he was talking about solving problems, and he said, "Look, life is not like baseball. It isn't 3 strikes and you're out. You try something, and if that doesn't work, you try something else, and if that doesn't work, you try something else, and you keep trying things until you figure out what works." And that stuck in my mind. And I went through several iterations of that in Kosovo, and at the food bank and in recruiting. I mean, that's all through life. It's not just in the military. That you just got to have that attitude that I'm going to solve this, and I'm just going to keep trying until I figure it out.
Yeah, and to just again pulling from the manual, disorder. In an environment of friction, uncertainty, and fluidity, those are the previous sections. War gravitates naturally toward disorder. Like the other attributes of the environment of war, disorder is an integral characteristic of war. We can never eliminate it. And scrolling down, the occurrences of war will not unfold like clockwork. Thus, we cannot hope to impose precise, positive control over events. The best we can hope for is to impose a general framework of order on the disorder, to prescribe the general flow of action rather than to try to control each event. And then scrolling down to the art and science of war, at the conclusion, it says, the art of war requires the intuitive ability to grasp the essence of a unique battlefield situation, the creative ability to devise a practical solution, and the strength of purpose to execute the act. And that's kind of what you're describing, I think, right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of my favorite books that I recommend that every leader, absolutely every leader should have to read, is Heights of Courage by Kahalani. And he was the battalion commander on the Golan Heights in 1973 when he was attacked by 2 Syrian armor divisions. And the reason I recommend it to leaders is because it's a lesson in crisis management, that nothing goes like you plan it to go. And he was going from crisis to crisis to crisis. And sometimes he'd have 2 or 3 crises at the same time, and he had to figure out what the priority was, which one is the risk, and which ones are the gambles. And he had to prevent the gambles from happening. He can let the risk go on a little bit longer. And it just goes through his mind, his thoughts about how he was handling all this crisis management at the same time. And like I said, he was just going from one to another to another to another for 3 days. I mean, he basically slept very little. I mean, he was just, because it was a constant onslaught. And they did pause for a little bit, and he did go down for sleep for a little bit. But for the most part, he was awake, just running from crisis to crisis.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I wrote that down. I'll have to read that book. So I know that we talked the other day when we were exchanging emails about the topics for this show. I mentioned chapter 4, the conduct of war. as being one that I really wanted to focus on. But before we get there, you know, the more I was like reading through the theory of war, which is chapter 2. There are a lot of things in this one that I just wanted to touch on because there are some great, again, just some great highlights that you had provided. The first of which being, the aim in war is to achieve our will. The immediate requirement is to overcome our enemy's ability to resist us, which is a product of the physical means at his disposal and the strength of his will. We must either eliminate his physical ability to resist us, or short of this, we must destroy his will to resist. And you think about, you know, in the psychological information battle space, you know, there's different ways you could apply that. You could apply that to the, you know, this kind of contrived left-right paradigm, which of course has kind of spun out of control, you know, with the assassination of Charlie Kirk, and just the fallout from that, more so than, you know, whatever actually happened with the assassination itself. Obviously the fallout from that, and the behavior and the conduct of and misconduct of people responding to it, you know, positively and negatively. There obviously is a deep cultural division in America that needs to be addressed, and that's not something that's going to be addressed by force, and it's not something that can be addressed kinetically. It's something that's going to need to be addressed through other means, and we're not going to solve that equation here tonight. But I just think it's something that people should think about when you think about the will to resist, and is it the person on the ground, you know, the useful idiot, so to speak, who has been indoctrinated to hate you, that is your enemy? Or is it the person who has indoctrinated those people to hate you that is your enemy? And then how do you engage those different elements in different ways to make sure that you're not alienating the people who ultimately you need to build a society with, but at the same time you are addressing the root cause of it and eliminating it in one form or another from the equation, from the battlefield, so it no longer is imposing itself the way.
Yeah, well, I think part of what you got to be careful of is, you know, you may think that you are destroying their will by an act, and the exact opposite happens, which I think you can look at the Charlie Kirk assassination, and whoever did it was probably, you know, if it was a bad guy, they were hoping to destroy the will of the people on the right. If it was somebody other than the left, who knows? I don't know. Then maybe that was the purpose, was to strengthen the will of the people on the right. I mean, I don't know, but you know, again, just because you've got a plan and you think this is what is going to happen when you do something, doesn't always happen that way. So you better understand the branches and sequels that you got to run off of that initial plan, because if you don't, you're gonna be jumping through hoops, and that's never a good thing to be doing during an operation, no matter what type of operation it is. You want to have some, like that said, you want to have some semblance of control, order in it. You can't control the entire thing, but every little bit that you can control, the better off you're going to be. And I think that's a good example of it. You don't always know what the result's going to be. Even if you accomplish what you had planned to do, you don't know the result of that, because you don't know the mindset of the people that you're trying to influence. You don't have complete control over it. And let's look at it. You know, World War II. The Germans, by all means, should have won in Russia, but they didn't take into account the mindset of the Russian people, the love for motherland, and the more brutal they were, the more effective they were, the stronger the resistance got. And so, you know, they miscalculated the Russian people. They really did. They thought they would just, as soon as they captured a few hundred or few million people or killed a few million people, they just give up. And that was the exact opposite of what happened.
It's a good point. It's a really, really good point. Yeah, and I know that as we run through a few more of these subsections that we're going to be talking more about the Germans and some of the tactics they were using. Because again, like Alpha, I did a show with Alpha yesterday, and I mentioned that we were going to be doing this, and he said he was very excited about that because he's been trying to convey to people that the applications of these kinetic lessons, or these lessons that are meant for kinetic warfare, are actually very applicable to the non-kinetic elements or non-kinetic facets of warfare. And so to that point, I think it might make sense to talk about this next section, which is entitled The Spectrum of Conflict. And down here, it says the levels of war. It says war takes place simultaneously at several correlated levels, each with differing ends, means, characteristics, and requirements. And I'll just read the highlights. Activities at the strategic level focus directly on our national policy objectives. Strategy can be thought of as the art of winning wars. Strategy establishes goals in theaters of war. It assigns forces, provides assets, and imposes conditions on the use of force. Activities at the tactical level of war focus on the application of combat power to defeat an enemy in combat at a particular time and place. Tactics can be thought of as the art and science of winning engagements and battles. And then finally, the operational level of war links the strategic and tactical levels. It is the use of tactical results to attain strategic objectives. The operational level includes deciding when, where, and under what conditions to engage the enemy in battle, and when, where, and under what conditions to refuse battle with reference to higher aims. As strategy deals with wars and tactics with battles and engagements, the operational level of war is the art of winning campaigns. I thought that was really interesting, and I think you said that you had you might have had an anecdote that you could share that breaks that down for us.
Yeah, well, I think that use the first Gulf War. That's the war I was in, but I think whoever was in it, in Iraq from 2003 on, or in Afghanistan, they probably could come up with the same analogies, just using different examples. But in the first Gulf War, the strategic objective of the national policy, the national objective, was to get Iraq out of Kuwait. Period. That's what we were sent there to do. Then, like it said, the tactical piece, or the operational piece, was how do we accomplish that in the big plan? And they came up with, if you want to get the soldiers out of Iraq, destroy the Republican Guard divisions. And so we came up with the plan, the big left hook, to do that. And then the tactics piece was those individual battles that took place against the Republican Guard and whoever else we ran into, but certainly the Republican Guard. And, to go along with those levels, I think you got to also think about, and it's in that book later on, I don't know exactly where, it might even be in that section, but the difference between a feint and a demonstration. And because that's how you economize your power, so that you can put the majority of your power up against a lesser amount of their power. So a feint, you actually want to make contact with the enemy to make them think that that's the main effort. That's where you're coming. And in the first Gulf War, that was the 1st Cavalry Division, who went into the Wadi al-Batin and fought a couple of days there. But they had no intentions of trying to penetrate the defenses there. They just wanted to hold those people in place until the big left hook got around behind them. And so that's a feint. You actually have to make contact and hold people in place. And then the demonstration for us in the first Gulf War, that was the Marine Corps in the ships off the coast of Kuwait. They never engaged during the battle. There was no plan for them to make a beach landing, but the Iraqis didn't know that. So they had to hold people in place in case the Marines did land in Kuwait, did a beach landing in Kuwait. And there may have been a plan that if they had pulled out, that then they would land, but that was used mainly as a demonstration. And again, that gives you the economy of force that you need to concentrate your combat power against a lesser force. So you're not it's not a solid surface. You can find those gaps in between, and that's what we did. If we ran into a tough opponent, we just went around them and killed them from behind, because there was all those gaps that we used. We didn't expend a lot of very little people and equipment on head-on engagements.
Yeah, and that was one of the big takeaways I think that I had from our first conversation, was the difference between a feint and a demonstration. Because you're right, as a layman, when I thought of maneuver warfare, I really only thought of feints. But then when you explained what a demonstration was, that it makes all the sense in the world that would also be a tactic that you would use, and maybe even use more often than a feint.
Well, World War II, General Patton, Phantom Army in England that they thought was going to cross over to the potted clay area. That was a demonstration. There was no plan for him. He didn't even have an army. It was blow up tanks and planes and artillery and jeeps. I mean, there was no real equipment there. It was all just a demonstration.
Yeah, is that the famous video of the guys flipping over the inflatable tanks? Yeah,
picking them up and carrying them to a new spot.
Yeah. And those are all I'm pretty sure all the guys who were making that stuff were art students. Those were like artists and stuff that they had recruited into the army to make those.
I don't know that, but
because you'd have to have some.
Weren't combat soldiers.
Yeah, you certainly you'd have to have some technical skill to make those things and make them look real enough so that from a distance you would actually believe it was a tank that you were looking at. Interesting tactic. But so this is the this next section, which I think we covered. This is the section we really covered in the last meeting. The last discussion we had was the styles of warfare, and that's where it describes the two different styles of warfare: the attrition style, which is who has the bigger stick, basically, and then there's maneuver warfare, which is something that Burning Bright and I think reference more often in our analysis. Our analogies rather to the information battle space. But there was one highlight that I wanted to point out, which I thought this was a really great highlight here. The object of maneuver is not so much to destroy physically as it is to shatter the enemy's cohesion, organization, command, and psychological balance. Successful maneuver depends on the ability to identify and exploit enemy weakness, not simply on the expenditure of superior might. So I thought that was, because it's talking about psychological balance, it's talking about shattering the enemy's cohesion, it's talking about breaking up their organization, their command. If you think of in the information battle space that the enemy has a vote, and the enemy probably has assets that are out there that are trying to influence the zeitgeist and push people towards a certain opinion or push people towards a certain worldview. And they have all the resources on their side. They have the money, they have the media, they have the government agencies, and to some extent. How do you take that on if we're just basically the villagers with pitchforks, so to speak, and maneuvering around them and breaking their cohesion, breaking up their messaging, and throwing off their psychological balance? It seems like that is the objective.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that, there certainly, you can think of ways that is happening right now. Badlands media and all of the alternative media on the web is certainly putting a crack in the mainstream media's consolidation of power that it's had for so many years. And every time that truth and media organizations bring out something that's going on, it makes that crack a little bit bigger. And again, that's what you're looking for, those the gaps, not the surfaces. So every time that you can put just a little crack and make it a little bit bigger, more and more information can get in there that shows just how they're lying to everybody. And then I think you said that they've got or had at least all the government agencies. And I think that that's being taken care of the same way. It's, just they're figuring out who the sleepers were, who the people who are leaking things, who the people who have done bad things over the last few decades, and they're eliminating those. And I think those government agencies are slowly flipping toward the side of good, and eventually hopefully we'll have them there. And I think that's the same for the judicial branch as well. They're figuring out who the bad judges are, the ones who don't follow the rule of law, and I think eventually that they will be removed. At least you hope that's what's going to happen, because those are the things that have to happen. Again, that's the strategy part. What do we want it to look like at the end? And I think, President Trump, no doubt, says we got to have all this cleaned up so that we can give the power back to the people, because until it's all cleaned up, you can't do that. So I think, again, you can use these concepts of maneuver warfare in every one of the dime. The diplomacy, the information, the military, the economic. Maneuver warfare can be used in every one of those.
Yeah.
And I think, you look at what he's doing with the international cartels and all that. I mean, that's a combination, mainly economic. He is doing some, ask Venezuela, he is doing some kinetic military operations, but for the most part, it's all economic. So he understands what he's doing.
Yeah, and to that point, because we did, I guess it wasn't on this show, it was on the Narrative with Burning Bright a few weeks ago. I went on there and we were talking about Venezuela. Since then, President Trump has issued an executive order to expand Executive Order 13818, which is the famous one about human rights violations and freezing assets, and he targeted that judge in Brazil, Moraes, his wife, because apparently all the assets of this judge, this is the judge that sentenced Bolsonaro to 27 years in prison, and did a lot of other pretty draconian things. Trump went after the wife because the wife is the one who basically manages like the checkbook and has all the assets in her name, and so now her assets, as far as the U.S. government has power, are frozen. So there's another example of whether she's connected to cartels or anything, who knows? But it is down in that part of the world, and that's an example of using the economic facet of warfare against them.
And the sanctions that he's imposed on people, all that is all, I would consider that maneuver warfare on those levels. But yeah, maneuver warfare, it can be used just like Alpha said. You and Alpha were talking. It can be used at every aspect of the government, how we interact with other countries, the diplomacy, the information, the military, and the economic.
There's another highlight that you had included that I wanted to read actually before we go to the next section, and it says, by definition, maneuver relies on speed and surprise, for without either we cannot concentrate strength against enemy weakness. Tempo is itself a weapon, often the most important. The need for speed in turn requires decentralized control, and that goes back to what you were saying, where understanding the commander's intent enables the field commanders to go out and make decisions on their own without having to go back and ask permission. And then tempo becomes kind of itself becomes the weapon to destabilize the enemy's command infrastructure and their ability to respond.
Well, that might be a good place to talk about the OODA loop if you want to do that.
Yes, let's do that. If you would, please explain the OODA loop to us.
Yeah. So again, it's all about decision making, and you want to make decisions at the lowest level. The people who are on the ground, seeing with their own eyes what's going on, as long as they know the mission, the intent and the mission command, stay within this left and right limit, then they can do whatever they want. During the Korean War, Colonel Boyd, who was an Air Force pilot, came up with this OODA loop, this diagram, and really brought this type of thinking, decision making, into the United States military. And as we were talking about before, and it really came out of the fact that the MiGs, we had F-86 Sabres were our main aircraft, and the MiGs were faster and more maneuverable than our planes. So one of the things he quickly figured out was that one advantage that we had over them was the big canopy. We could actually observe more area than they could. And so he came up with this OODA loop, which is observe, orient, decide, and act. And he figured out that the faster you could do that, the more you got into their decision making, because you're making a decision, 2 or 3 decisions before they make one. So the decision they're coming up with is already overcome by events. You're already two events ahead of them, and it made a difference in the amount of success that the American pilots were having during the Korean War. But the OODA loop, which we went over this as a lieutenant. I don't think it's in the FM1. It might be. I don't know.
I don't believe it is. No, I don't think it is.
But we covered this as well. My first battalion commander was a genius. I'm just telling you. And he was adamant that he didn't care if you were a sergeant. If you were on the ground and a decision had to be made, and you knew what the intent was, and as long as you moved in that right direction, he didn't care if you made the decision. And us lieutenants absolutely got to make our own decisions out there on the battlefield, because we had the eyes on the situation. We had a better feel for it than he did back, and he wasn't even that far back, but he wasn't right there where the rubber meets the road. So this is a concept that, again, you can use this anywhere. You can use this in business. You can use it in government. You can use it wherever, because it's just a decision-making tool. Observe whatever's going on in front of you, orient toward that. Whatever you decide, that's your decision. How am I going to handle what I'm observing? Then you decide, and then you act. You make the decision. Okay, you may come up with 2 different options during your orientation of what's going on. You may come up with 2 or 3 different options that you can do. You decide which one you're going to do, and then you act on it. And the faster you can get that loop moving, the more you're going to get into their mindset, which the maneuver warfare, like I said, that's the goal, is not to destroy them. I mean, if you can easily, then do it. But the main part is to get inside their mind and make it so that they realize they can't win, and so they give up.
That's interesting. Yeah. And the whole like the observation aspect for those who are watching. I showed a picture of this enormous canopy that Oak was mentioning, and you really can get a sense that they can see all the way around. So it is interesting that the observation aspect of it becomes a good way to compensate for having the inferior vehicle, for having the inferior equipment.
Yeah, you hope that you don't run into that situation, and we haven't in the U.S. Army, U.S. military for a few years. Although I think that if you can believe that the Chinese equipment is as good as they say it is, that's always an if, because for many years we always talked about how big and bad the T-72 tank was, and once we went up against it in Iraq, we figured out that it wasn't quite as big and bad as we thought it was. So you never know, but you have to assume that it is as good as they say it is, because it's better to be wrong that way than the other way. Think that it's not as good and you're surprised. So I think that especially if you're outgunned, if you're outmanned, if you're then this becomes even more important to get inside the decision-making process of your enemy.
Yeah. This also reminds me of the like the feedback loop that Chris Paul speculates that Trump is always running against the American people to figure out like where is the zeitgeist currently and where should he go next with his next narrative deployment, so to speak. The first time
I think you could absolutely put that in this OODA loop. I mean, he throws something out there, he observes what happens, then he starts to orient, he starts to figure out, okay, what are my options? He decides what the option that he wants to take is, and then he acts on it. You know, again, this can be used at any level and in any profession. It isn't just a military decision-making process. This is just a simple decision-making process that happened to be developed by a warfighter, but it could have been developed by a businessman.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Well, yeah, I don't know if there's more you wanted to say on the OODA loop, or if you wanted to talk about concentration and speed, because that was another topic that we had mentioned when we were in the pre-show.
Yeah, I think we can move on to the concentration and speed, and I think that is the heart of maneuver warfare. Is, you know, because I told you earlier, you know, I had buddies who weren't buying into the maneuver warfare thing, and they said it's still a science. Tanks move so fast, and to get that number of tanks to this place takes that much time, no matter what. And I said, I'm not arguing that point. What I'm arguing is that, yeah, you still have to take into account all the science, but then you look at the psychological piece, the surfaces and the gaps. Not only do you have to get them there, but you want to get them there in the right place at the right time so that they can influence the battle the way you want it to influence the battle. And I think that's what the Germans did very well in World War II. It's what we have done since then in our army. I mean, when before FM1 and before FM100 in the army, we were a defensive army. In Europe, we said, we're going to stand behind our barricades and in our tank defilade positions, and we're going to let the Russians come to us. And what really changed that was the Arab-Israeli war in 1973, when we figured out that just sitting still, and because they figured it out, just sitting still, you get overwhelmed. You've got to take the offensive to them. And the only way you can do that when you're outmanned, which we were in Europe with the Russians at that point, is the maneuver warfare piece. There's no other way to win. And we got that from the Germans during World War II. And if you look at the battles that the Germans were very successful in, they used maneuver warfare very well. The Battle of Sedan in France in 1940, that's what opened the whole Western front to the Germans. And they concentrated the 7th Armored Division on a very narrow front, which had Rommel was a battalion, I think he was a battalion, maybe a brigade commander during that battle, and Guderian was the division commander. So probably two of the greatest armor minds of World War II. And they concentrated on that narrow front. They punched a hole in it, and then they just fed everything through that hole. They didn't have to break a hole in everywhere else. They just did feints and demonstrations everywhere else to hold those people in place until the people who penetrated could get around behind them, take out their artillery, their supply, their command and control. And they didn't have to fire a shot. They just surrendered. A bunch of the rest of them just surrendered because they realized that they couldn't win at that point. So the Battle of Sedan was one of them. And I would argue that the opening invasions against the Russians were absolutely maneuver warfare when they were encircling 400, 300, 400, 600,000 Russians and they were surrendering. But then they got greedy and they got their sights fixed on a certain thing, Leningrad in the north and Moscow in front of them. And they stopped using maneuver warfare to go around. They just did a straight line. And part of that, they knew they were running out of time before winter hit. But the consequences of that was that later on in the war, and that the Russians figured it out, and they just didn't sit there and wait to get surrounded. They tried to escape earlier than before, and so the places where they didn't do a good job, Leningrad and Moscow, I already mentioned those. Stalingrad, which was a disaster for the German army because they abandoned all thoughts of maneuver warfare there. That they just went attrition warfare completely, and it was the Russians who used maneuver warfare against the Germans and surrounded General Paulus's army there in Stalingrad, and in Kursk also the Russians used maneuver warfare against the Germans because again they got focused on one piece. They weren't focused on defeating the enemy. They were concentrated on capturing a certain piece of ground, and that's never a good thing. So here's the benefit. We talk about maneuver warfare. The mission absolutely depended on mission-oriented orders and commander's intent. If you don't have those, you can't do maneuver warfare. And then commanders making the decision at the lowest level, which we just talked about, at the decisive place, at the decisive time. When they see it, they have not only the capability to act, but they have the authority to act on those. And the surprise, you read that piece in there, the surprise causes the lack of, or the disintegration of the morale and the will to continue to fight. And concentrating that overwhelming combat power on either a gap or to create that gap. So you're not fighting attrition warfare across the whole front. You're using feints and demonstrations to allow you to concentrate those economy of force pieces, so you can concentrate the overwhelming combat power at a single point. And that's the key to, those are the keys to maneuver warfare.
Yeah, that's all well said. I mean, then we've covered some of the Russians' thinking before, and how they figured out how to defeat the Blitzkrieg, which was to retreat and then circle back and actually outflank the guys who were trying to outflank them. But yeah, guys, that's like the Eastern Front in World War II is really where a lot of interesting combat tactics and just theory, I think, develops. But going back to the speed and concentration, because I think you're right. Reading through this whole manual many times, the theory that's why one of the reasons the Theory of War Chapter 2 really ended up sticking out to me. And I think what we'll do is we'll cover Chapter 2 tonight, and then when you come back, we'll do Chapter 4, the Conduct of War. Pulling these highlights up, this stuff again is just, it resonates so deeply. Of all the consistent patterns we can discern in war, there are two concepts of such significance and universality that we can advance them as principles: concentration and speed. Concentration is the convergence of effort in time and space. It is the means by which we develop superiority at the decisive time and place. Effective concentration may achieve decisive local superiority for numerically inferior force. We must concentrate not only as the decisive location, but also at the decisive moment. Thus, a pattern develops: disperse, concentrate, disperse again. And then it goes on to describe speed. Speed is the rapidity of action. Speed over time is tempo, the consistent ability to operate fast. Speed over distance or space is velocity, the ability to move fast. Both forms are genuine sources of combat power. In other words, speed is a weapon. Superior speed allows us to seize the initiative and dictate the terms of combat, forcing the enemy to react to us. Speed provides security. I thought that was like a really interesting line right there. Speed provides security, because that's, kind of contradicts, what you might think like initially, but there's so much truth in that.
There is, and there is a reason that the M1 tank, when it was developed in the late or early 80s, they put that turbo engine in there because they wanted that quick speed, that acceleration right from the very beginning. Because again, we were making the move from being a defensive army to an offensive army, and speed was so important. But I think one of the things that we got to really emphasize here with the concentration of combat power is that it doesn't have to be everything right there in front of the enemy. One of the great things about the American military is that we use that combined arms tactic very well. We use artillery, we use aircraft, we use helicopters, we use missiles. So you may not have to have a numerically superior force in front of that spot that you're trying to penetrate if you can bring all the other assets in at the right time, in the right place, as it said, decisive time and the decisive place, then you can, that will increase even a small number of ground forces. That increases their potential and their ability to defeat a superior enemy. And again, the whole concept of maneuver warfare is you concentrate on a narrow front, you punch a hole, you get through, and then you clean up everything behind them, and eventually come back. And most of the time people surrender. We did the same thing in the first Gulf War. The speed at which we moved, we were behind units before they even knew that we were there. We were moving so fast, and I got the technological piece, the revolution in military affairs, which we haven't even touched and probably not going to get to this time. We'll have to hit it next time, and that's okay. But really, there was only two things in the first Gulf War that I would say was the beginning of a revolution in military affairs that we now see today. Number one was GPS. We knew where we were, and where we were, I'm here to tell you, this piece of sand looked just like that piece of sand, like that piece of sand. Without GPS, it would have been tough to do what we did. And in fact, not all of us even had GPSs. We had Lorans, which are actually for ships, but we were close enough to the water that they worked. And then the other piece was the precision bomb strikes. And I know General Quas can probably talk a lot more about that than I can, but the precision of being able to drop one bomb, one kill, instead of like World War II, where you drop 1,000 bombs to get one kill, if you were lucky. In the first Gulf War, it was one bomb, one kill every single time. I mean, or the Apache, one missile, one kill. I remember the Battle of the Ramayan oil field, which was right near the end of the battle. In fact, it was even after the ceasefire. And we engaged an Iraqi brigade that was trying to escape and supposedly fired upon us. And for 4 hours, we fired M1 tanks, Bradleys, tow missiles, artillery, Apache helicopters were firing missiles, called in airstrikes for 4 hours. And the next day, I mean, there was nothing left on that battlefield. It was there, but it was all turned over and burned out. And in 4 hours, we destroyed a whole brigade.
Wow. The efficiency.
Because of the precision. Precision is the key.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So there's two more sections that I think we should that I want to hit that are pretty short. And then we can take questions from the audience before we sign off. Before Ash's show starts, and that would be, pull this back up. Well, this is a great line at the end of the concentration and speed. The combination of concentration and speed is momentum. It adds punch or shock effect to our actions. It follows that we should strike the decisive blow with the greatest possible combination of concentration and speed. So this next section, like I read this whole section just thinking 100% of Donald Trump and his old Twitter account, like before he was even president, or the first term. Surprise and boldness. It says we must now acknowledge two additional considerations that are significant as multipliers of combat power: surprise and boldness. By surprise, we mean striking the enemy at a time or place in a manner for which he is unprepared. Surprise can decisively affect the outcome of combat far beyond the physical means at hand. Surprise is the paralysis, if only partial and temporary, of the enemy's ability to resist. Surprise is based on speed, secrecy, and deception. Its advantages are only temporary and must be quickly exploited. And then it goes on to explain boldness. Boldness is a multiplier of combat power in much the same way that surprise is. Boldness must be tempered with judgment, lest it border on recklessness. But this does not diminish its significance. And again, like I just think of Donald Trump's boldness and his ability to surprise people and catch them off guard at all times.
Yeah, I agree. And then the next piece of that between the surprise and boldness is then you reinforce success. So once, because like I said, it is temporary. Surprise is temporary. Somebody's going to come back to their senses after they've been surprised. They're going to wake up. But when you surprise somebody, that kind of paralyzes them for a moment. But if you don't continue to pile on and reinforce that success, then you allow them to come back to their senses, and now you got to start all over again. And I think that President Trump is good at that. You know, he just keeps piling this one on and that one on, and he just reinforce when he gets a success, he just keeps reinforcing that success.
Yeah, I mean, all it takes is just one true social post from him, and then the media is like seeing stars trying to figure out what did he mean by this, what is he getting at, and by the time they figure it out,
he's already got the next one out.
Yeah, he's already off meeting with the next world leader, you know, like working on the next trade negotiation. And so that takes us into the final section that I wanted to discuss this evening, which is exploiting vulnerability and opportunity. And it says, to win, we must concentrate combat power towards a decisive aim. We obviously stand a better chance of success by concentrating strength against enemy weakness rather than against strength. So we seek to strike the enemy where, when, and how he is most vulnerable. We should focus our efforts on the one thing which, if eliminated, will do the most decisive damage to his ability to resist us. And yeah, I think that might be that. Or I'm sorry. Therefore, we should focus our efforts against a critical enemy vulnerability. Reduced to its simplest terms, we should strike our enemy where and when we can hurt him most. So, yeah, I mean, that, again, I think about the strategic things that Trump says, like when he went out with with RFK Jr. and those doctors, and he was talking about Tylenol causing autism. But at the same time, he's talking about vaccines the whole time. He's like, well, I mean, vaccines, right? I mean, I've been thinking about this for 20 years, and man, are we injecting a lot of vaccines into these kids. But, you know, Tylenol is really who we're going after. So, of course, I forget what the company's called. They're suing Trump now for saying that their product causes autism, and maybe we get the real disclosure during that lawfare suit. Who knows? Yeah. But at the same time,
there's a reason he brought it out that way.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's not going after the vaccines right now. He's going after Tylenol. But while he's going after Tylenol, he's sitting there talking about vaccines the whole time, and there's just a lot of signal there. So
yeah,
just one example.
I've heard several people say that it's the combination. The Tylenol and the vaccine, that they interact with each other in a way that could absolutely be the cause. You know, and I'm not a scientist or a doctor, so I don't have any idea. But I certainly, I mean, it makes sense to me just hearing other people talk about it. But I think that's the key. You know, you find a weakness and you exploit it, and you pile on that and keep that decisive, you know, reinforce that success wherever it was. And here's the key, you know, because it said earlier in there, when to fight and when not to fight. You got to know when to back off and say, okay, we're not winning that one. That's not, we thought that was a weak spot, but that's not a weak spot. So let's back off, reevaluate, do the OODA loop again, and figure out where the weak spot is and orient on that. and decide what we want to do and then act on it. So I think you can always, you got to always be looking to, because you don't want to reinforce failure. I mean, then you're just wasting assets and time and money and whatever, and in combat people. But in the business world, in the government world, you want to be decisive, find that decisive point, a weakness, one of those decisive points that are weak, and that's where you make the crack. And then from there, you got all kinds of options that you can do after that.
Yeah, it's a great point. And people, I think I remember this very distinctly. The first presidency, Trump's first presidency, where defeating Hillary Clinton. Like, first we defeated the Bush dynasty in the primaries, and then we defeated Hillary Clinton in the election. And everyone was like, "We did it! We did it! We blew up the Death Star. It's over. Like, we've won." Now Trump's going to come in office in January 2017. He's just going to destroy everybody. He's just going to like all the enemies at once are going to get rounded up, and we're going to be done. And this again was like before Q. This was before like that, the hype of all of that. Everyone just assumed Trump was going to come out swinging and take everybody on at the exact same time. But again, if you kind of look back and just stop and think about it, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. To fight every single enemy at once, you're kind of making yourself a very easy target and setting yourself up for failure.
Well, that concept in the war fighting would be a battle of attrition, and a battle of attrition generally don't end well for either side. But it's certainly the one that is attacking generally gets the worst of a battle of attrition. So he realized that he couldn't win by a battle of attrition. He had to use maneuver warfare, and so that's the tactics he's using. Find those little weak points, make a crack in it, keep at it, keep reinforcing that until the crack is big enough that then other things start to be exposed and become vulnerable, and then you move to that. And that's the great thing about maneuver warfare, and however form we want to talk about it, whether it's combat or politics or economics or whatever, is that once you've made the penetration, now you have a choice of where you want to go next. And the enemy has to try to defend every one of those points that you could go to. And so again, now you, with speed and concentration, you are now making the next point the weak point that you can penetrate. And then once you penetrate that, now you got a whole nother set that the enemy has to try to defend. And you get to choose where you want to go from there. So I think that's what you got to really think about here is as he's getting those cracks, once he makes a penetration, and whether that's going to be, whether that's in convictions or whatever, once one of them happens, now he's got a hole, and now he can choose where he's going next. But they got to defend all of it. He just has to concentrate all of his power on one of those. They got to defend it all.
Yeah, it's a great point. And, again, like going back to this presidency, everybody was saying, well, I thought on day one we were going to get all the disclosure. I thought on day one we were, everything was going to be solved on day one. We were going to get all the answers. Like, what's going on here? We're only 8 months in at this point. And if you really look at like the patience, like from a patient standpoint, look at all of to steal Burning Bright's term, the cascade of crisis that's happening right now. Because not only do you have all the geopolitical like hellstorm happening, we saw today with Netanyahu, but you have this shutdown looming. Trump literally said, okay, I have to leave this press conference now to go meet with the congressional leaders from both parties because we're going to shut the government down. I don't know if y'all have heard about that. We also have them going after the cartels in South America. We mentioned that earlier, as well as like the Federal Reserve is kind of a disaster. Like no matter what the Federal Reserve does, they seem to be screwing everything up. So, not to mention, the whole vaccine, like Tylenol thing that we just discussed. So all of these different things that have kind of been brewing are suddenly now coming to a head at the same time. And, if you're the enemy, how, like, which one do you address? Do you go reinforce the cartels in Colombia? Do you go back up big pharma? Do you go help the bankers and the Federal Reserve? I mean, there are a lot of different fires that they have to put out, and all of them have kind of been slowly building up over time.
And like I said, once he figures out which one is the decisive target at that point in time, once he penetrates that, then it puts, now they got to reinforce them all, and that's hard. So, and then he's just got to figure out what the next decisive point is and weaken it to the point where he can penetrate it and defeat it, and then he's got other ones to choose, and they still got to defend them all.
It almost kind of shifts from like a maneuver warfare style to attrition warfare, because then they're spreading themselves thin and they don't have the resources to actually put out all the fires. And now, of course, like, they're doing things where people, the public is just like, wait a minute, no, like, this doesn't make any sense. We don't believe you anymore now that you're saying this stuff. The Charlie Kirk thing kind of comes to mind, like the way that a lot of that has been handled is people are just saying, we don't believe what you're saying, even though this is Trump's government saying it. We just don't believe you. And maybe that's the point. Maybe Trump is training us to stop just believing whatever the government tells us, and maybe we should start thinking for ourselves and investigating for ourselves, and solving our own problems, as opposed to from the intellectual standpoint, as opposed to asking for answers from authorities.
Bring back some critical thinking.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we are up against the clock here, Oak. So I'd like to do something real quick. I want to do a quick ad read, and then see if we have any questions from the audience, and then we will shut it down and send everybody over to Culture of Change with Ash. Okay, so I have our friends from Tamarack Gardens. We appreciate their support. Introducing Tamarack Gardens, handcrafted herbal remedies, teas, and skincare made with weeds, wildflowers, and wild harvested herbs in the Pacific Northwest. Their products will heal your skin, boost collagen, lighten dark spots, and slow aging. Plus, it is safe for babies, grandmas, and everyone in between. From salves for headaches, bug bites, and arthritis, to supplements for liver and kidney health, they harness God's bounty for your health and to keep you out of the doctor's office. Family owned in North Idaho, Tamarack Gardens, dermatologist recommended products support your body inside and out, because your health deserves better. Visit tamarackgarden.com. With promo code Badlands, you will get free shipping on orders over $35. That's tamarackgarden.com, promo code Badlands. All right. And I was able to meet them at Deadwood. They are tremendous people, very, very nice people. And it's always nice to meet the people who are sponsoring the show, because when you meet them in person and you see they share our values, those are the people we want to support. We want to, build this new economy with. So thanks again to Tamarack Gardens. And let's see, do we have any questions from the chat? Looks like we got Texas Jules gifted 5 subscriptions. So thank you, Texas Jules. I see a lot of people in the chat thanking you, Oak, for being here and doing this. I noticed G Money early in the chat saying, I need to go read this book. Talk about somebody who's picked their hill they're going to die on, like their area of the info war they're going to focus on. I mean, that's a perfect example. And G Money is not somebody who really needs direction. Like he understands the end game. He's going to go kick down doors, so to speak, proverbially, figuratively speaking, and take the next bunker without anybody's permission, right?
Yeah, I think he would benefit from the field manual, though. Because he talks about I can't remember the name of the one that he always talks about that's the crypto one, but yeah, but I think he would enjoy
software.
Yeah. And I think he would enjoy the FM1.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, all right, Oak. Well, we appreciate it. We're going to have you back. It looks like tentatively we're looking at October 20th. We'll confirm that, but it'll be a couple weeks from now for part 2. And that's where we'll get into chapter 4, the conduct of war. But thanks again for being here. Everybody, please hit the thumbs up. And we will see y'all next week. And I'm going to rate us over to Culture of Change. Asha show is beginning right now. So thanks again, Oak. We will talk soon.
Yep, no problem, Gordon.
Deodorant should do more than cover you up. It should protect you all day long.
Dude, the deodorant stick is legit. I like the mint one. And, you know, you go work out and you kind of get like, you know, you get funky if you work out. Dude, like at the end of my workout, like I'm sweating, shirt got all those sweat. Like I'm like, dude, I still smell good. Like I absolutely love it. If you guys haven't tried it, try it.
That's the difference with Soft Disclosure. No aluminum, no chemicals, just clean, natural ingredients that fight odor and keep you fresh through every workout, every meeting, every moment.
I've always struggled with the, like, you can't use aluminum deodorant because you're going to die if you use it kind of thing, because all of the non-aluminum deodorant products suck pretty much. Yeah. This is different. This is all day. You're all day good, and you're not putting any of that disgusting chemicals right near your lymph nodes.
Soft Disclosure deodorant, real protection, real freshness, built on truth. Available in mint and lemon grapefruit. Visit softdisclosure.com and use promo code Badlands for 15% off.
Soft Disclosure. Thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit the thumbs up on this video. And a special thank you to all of our advertising partners. Please remember to shift your dollars to support those businesses that support Badlands Media.